chick?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It's like pastrami, potato kugel.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh,
What's
I'm
this?
so full. Man. Oh, I wish I had
That's
known.
trolling. Just straight up trolling.
You're killing me, man.
I'm sorry.
If I had
maybe
known,
by the time.
I
maybe
didn't
by the
check.
time-
I didn't check my messages until right before I left.
I'm sorry.
All right.
Okay, so as we've said since the beginning, so one of the things that I mentioned,
Just, I'm full
I try
right
to
now.
mention frequently, is that questions are really an invitation. They're an invitation to go on a quest, right? To try to find the truth or find an insight. And I think we've been on a quest we're going on now 10 weeks. So hopefully we get to a conclusion and a Siyum, Meretz Hashem. So I want to start Kedarkenu B'Kodesh with a quote. This is actually a quote, a poem from Yoshua November. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Yoshua November. He's a native Pittsburgher. I knew him back when he was Josh, and when he and I would play basketball together, he would inevitably travel, so don't play basketball with Yoshua November. No, he's a great guy.
Is his last name really November?
Yes.
Okay.
He's really November. And his the poem that I picked, he's an award-winning poet. The poem I picked is called Prayer. And it goes as follows: before the silent prayer, some slip the hood of their prayer shawls over their heads, so that even among the worshippers, they are alone with God. Primo Levi wrote about the sadness of a cart horse shut between two shafts and unable even to look sideways. Let me be like those pious ones or that horse, so that even amidst the crowd, no other crosses the threshold of my dreaming. That is Prayer by Yoshua November. I think that's unlike the other poetry that we quoted before, this is very straightforward in terms of meaning, in terms of the pshat to the mushal or the allegorical language.
Are there a lot of contemporary Jewish or religious Jewish poets? Is it like a community?
Is it like a big scene? I don't know of too many. Certainly not in the Orthodox world. Like he's a Chabadsker. I don't know a lot of Chabadsker poets, and I don't know a lot of from people that can make a living being a poet.
Right.
Because he makes a living with it?
I don't know. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to do is kind of look back on the journey. We began after we went through just reading the text. We started by asking why is Shir Hashirim in Tanakh at all, right? And that really led to, I think, the two fundamental questions, which is what broadly is the meaning of the text, and what is it coming to teach us in the way that it's, grab a chair in the back. What is it coming to teach us in the way that it was written? Meaning, it's written in this poetic, allegorical fashion. If the point is to tell us that God loves the Jewish people have loved God throughout history, which is sort of the putative approach of the Medrash, then why not just say so in straightforward prose? From there, we talked about approaches to the text. We talked about Rashi and how there can be layers of meaning. There's pshat, and then you can layer allegory on top of that. Shir Hashirim's clearly written poetically, even though it never actually says so explicitly, right? Most of the mashalim in Tanakh will give you the mashal, and then they will tell you this is what the mashal is about. You don't really get that in any clear way in Shir Hashirim. It kind of falls into this vague area. So then we tried to look at different ways to help us understand what is it coming to teach us. We looked at the structure, and we saw compositional patterns that maybe can be viewed through a musical lens, but they certainly tie the book together in terms of it being a cohesive unit. We moved on to talk about various approaches to understanding the text. Some of the more recent commentators that we quoted were looking at the different parallels. So they contrasted Shir Hashirim with Bereshis and looked at Shir Hashirim as sort of the tikkun for Bereshis, or the resolution to some of the issues that were brought up in Bereshis. And then we looked at some other comparisons that sort of approach Shir Hashirim as a foil to either Mishlei or Hosea, where there you get this approach of the Jewish people straying, following Avodah Zarah and acting like a prostitute. And so in Shir Hashirim, you get the opposite of that. You get the loving relationship so that the Jewish people understand that that relationship is available still to them. All of that has really been focused on what the message might be. But we haven't really talked about why it's written as poetry, as music. So the first thing I want to do is share an idea with you that isn't really 100% related, but I think it's interesting enough to share it anyway. About 14 years ago, I was doing the Daf Yomi, and the Daf Yomi was doing Masechtas Nadarim, and I want to do like just maybe 10 lines of Nadarim with you. The Gemara is talking about when someone makes a neder not to get hana from somebody else. So Ruvain says, whatever the language is, but Ruvain says, I'm not going to get any hana from Shimon, so what is Shimon still allowed to do for Ruvain? So the Mishnah says that Shimon can malamdo medrash halachos va'agados, so Shimon can teach Ruvain medrash halacha and agada, avalo yilamdenu mikra, but he can't teach Ruvain mikra. So the Gemara wants to understand why can he not teach Ruvain mikra, but he can teach him this other stuff. So mikra my time lo yilamdenu mishum the kamahanile. The reason you can't teach him mikra is because you're benefiting him, and he swore off benefit from you. So the Gemara asks the obvious question. So medrash nami kamahanile. Well, Torah is Torah, right? So Amar Shmuel b'malkum shenotlin schar al hamikra. No, we're talking about a specific case where people get paid to teach chumash. They don't necessarily get paid ve'enotlin schar al medrash, and they don't get paid to teach medrash. So my posca, why would you pick such a specific case where there's a place where people get paid for mikra and not for? So kamash malan da afilu b'malkum shenotlin schar al hamikra shari lemishkal al medrash lo shari lemishkal. The additional lesson of the psak in the Mishnah is that even in a place where you're allowed to get paid, you're allowed to get paid to teach chumash. You're not allowed to get paid to teach medrash. So Maishna medrash below. Why can
who made these prohibitions?
So it sounds like this is from Chazal. This is from the Mishnah. So the Gemara wants to understand exactly your question. So Maishna medrash below. Why can you not get paid to teach medrash? So they learned that out. Chazal learned that from a pasuk. Moshe says, God at that time commanded me to teach you. And there's another pasuk that says, see, I'm teaching you chukim and mishpatim, kasher tzivani Hashem, just as Hashem commanded me. Ma ani bechinam, just like God taught me for free, afatem nami bechinam, so to you, when you teach, you have to also teach for free. So then the Gemara asks the obvious question, well, mikra nami bechinam. What do you mean? Moshe learned chumash for free, so why is there not a prohibition of teaching chumash for pay? Rav Amar, so there's two opinions. Rav says, no, you're right. Really, you shouldn't be able to charge for teaching chumash, but schar shimur. This is like my third grade Rebbe would yell at us and say, I'm not a babysitter. Apparently there is that's actually what he is kind of a babysitter, and the schar is the fact that the guy's getting paid is not really to teach you the chumash, it's because he's also watching the kid, right? That's Rav's opinion. Rabbi Yochanan Amar schar pisuk tamim. The reason that the guy is getting paid is not for the substance of the chumash, it's for teaching you the trup that goes along with the chumash. And the nafkamina is if you're teaching an adult versus a kid, right? A kid, there is shimur, an adult, there's not necessarily shimur. So I read that, and I emailed my Rebbe, what is this whole business of teaching the trup?
Well,
we don't even do that.
What would your Rebbe have said if you said, well, actually, the Gemara in the
says you're a babysitter.
You are a babysitter, so I'm sorry.
No, so this wasn't the third good Rebbe that I emailed. So before I had a chance to email that to him, I opened Oliver Sacks's Musicophilia.
He responded by saying, I'm not being paid for this, so I'm not going to respond.
And I will read to you from page 216. This may, it's actually kind of topical, unfortunately. There's someone in the news who's suffering from aphasia, but this is about aphasia. So this may also be the case with a different form of aphasia, so-called dynamic aphasia, where it's not the structure of sentences that's affected, but the initiation of speech. Patients with dynamic aphasia may speak very sparingly, yet produce syntactically correct sentences on the rare occasions when they do speak. So someone who's suffering from aphasia has a problem communicating. So Jason Warren et al. Described how an elderly man with mild frontal lobe degeneration and extreme dynamic aphasia was nonetheless unimpaired in musical initiative. He played the piano, could read and write music, and took part in a weekly singing group. He was also able to recite. What does that mean, recite? So as Warren et al. Noted, he was able to read a passage chosen at random from the Torah using the heightened intonation, which is distinct from both singing and ordinary reading, reserved for reading out loud. In other words, he could read from the Torah because he could lane. Because he was taught the Pisuk Tamim, he was able to store that information in his brain in a different way than if you're just given prose, right? One of the questions that we're trying to deal with over here is, why is Shir Hashirim written as a song? And I won't tell you this is the reason, but it's an interesting component of it, which is that song encodes differently than prose.
Yes.
But so was everything else with prose.
Ah, great. We're gonna keep going. Right. In other words, there are lots of other songs, and so.
And we've prose throughout all Tanakh.
Yeah, for sure. What I'm getting at is there's something about Shir Hashirim being written as a song that is valuable in how someone internalizes Shir Hashirim differently than if they're reading. And Shir Hashirim is even written differently than other songs in Tanakh. Other songs are written, the Gemara describes them as Reach al Gabed Levana, that you have to write them in a way where it shows that they're a song. Shir Hashirim is not written that way. So it's unique in its approach to song. Okay, so that's just sort of our musical interlude. But let's get back to the question at hand. How would, I'm going to try to address this by asking another question. How would a cynic describe the Kodesh HaKadoshim?
Real estate.
A cynic.
A cynic.
Real estate.
Real estate. It's a
Song
room.
and light show. Yeah, it's a song and dance, a smoke and mirrors.
Okay, but I'm saying just an actual description of it, not. It's a room with a box, some stones that are in the box. There's a sculpture on top.
Golden hemorrhoids inside the box.
Yeah, there's bigger sculptures. The box has some poles on it on either side, right? Very, very matter of factly, what you're getting, even if the cynic
are like, getting into it.
So even if the cynic is an art critic, right, describes everything in the most meticulous, flowery language possible, what is completely missing from the point, because the cynic is there's no emotion. It's not awe-inspiring, right?
Yeah.
He's not allowing the experience.
Why would you say that?
Because he's describing the substance and not the experience of the substance.
I've heard many art lectures wherein the description is quite emotional.
I'm not saying an art lecture is not emotional. I'm saying the cynic.
The cynic could say the same thing about it. I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the cynic is intentionally not allowing the experience to be a part of the equation.
Right, that's what
he's
saying.
He's not allowing the religious experience
Yeah.
to be part of it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean he's not allowing the experience to be part of it.
I hear what you're saying. He could still allow the aesthetic experience, even if he doesn't allow the
those who walk
religious.
into the Vatican and say it is quite amazing.
It's
building,
beautiful, but it doesn't. It's not meaningful.
But it's not. It doesn't bring me any closer to Catholicism.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful building.
Right.
So I mean, I wouldn't say I wouldn't say that they weren't awe-inspired by the building. They were awe-inspired by the building.
That's a fair distinction.
I don't know. I feel like it's a spectrum. I don't know. Like, I'm not. My thought is undeveloped, so I'm not gonna be.
I think anybody who walks into the Vatican who is an awe-inspired, you're
not gonna. Yeah, but.
I think a Catholic.
No. But I think what Moshe is trying to say is that even if the art critic or the whatever gets emotional, it's not getting emotional about the thing that the creator of the art meant them to get emotional about. I don't know,
fair.
Right. If you say, "Look at this amazing painting I did," and you look at the frame and you're like, "Oh, that's a pretty good quality frame," like what the artist means for you to convey to you, you're throwing that to the side. And like you might get, "Oh wow, this is really great wood and it's a special kind of cedar and poplar," and like you can have emotion from that, but it's like it's
But the same.
It's
But to
it's
say
self.
the person is emotional.
I don't want to say self-funded. Right? No, but
you want to say that they're not religiously inspired. That you could say.
I'd say that it's two different messages. The your guy is basically coming up with a message for himself.
Looking at Madonna and Child doesn't make me feel religious,
right?
But I can appreciate.
But you could be awe-inspired by it.
I could be awe-inspired.
I don't know. I feel like it's two. I feel like it's crossed messages. Like I feel like they're trying to convey one message, and you're like, I'm going to take whatever message I feel like, and that might be a meaningful message to you, but it's not. There's a disconnect in the message of artist and subject or observer, and that's what I think Moshe is talking about.
Right. So let me try to illustrate it from a different perspective. Why does someone write poetry rather than prose? Why, from your perspective, why is someone going to write poetry instead of prose? While we choose that to evoke feeling, right?
It can, but it's not specialized for. I mean, it can be. I mean,
right? Everyone communicates differently. This is the way he's choosing to communicate through. People communicate through sculpture, or,
right?
You know,
yes,
you can get your wife a pretty rock for her birthday. But the language that you're going to speak to is the language that's preferred if you're smart. I mean, like, you could say, well, this is a very beautiful rock. You know, this is what I'm trying to, look at how smooth it is. I'm just saying, like, the question he's saying is, why do you choose poetry? Because it's like maybe a better medium for particular message.
Okay, let's
I don't know.
Let's play that theory out. Rabbi Abram Joshua Heschel, I'm not sure if everyone has heard of him.
Walked with Dr. King.
Walked with Dr. King.
The whole thing.
Yes. One of the major theologians to come out of JTS in the 20th century.
Book, huh?
Yes. Yes, this was written by a friend of mine, Rabbi Shai Held. He talks about Heschel's style of writing. And he says as follows: Heschel's evocative style is not somehow incidental to his project. He is emphatically not a systematic philosopher who just happens to write beautifully. On the contrary, Heschel communicates as he does because he wants to galvanize the heart as well as the mind. The goal of theology is not ultimately to know something about God, but to know God. And this demands passion, not just cognition. This is why the poetry is so integral to the writing. Heschel strives to reintroduce his readers to the experience of wonder and the living reality of God, and for that, discursive analytical prose alone simply will not do.
I think I'm just going to throw this out there.
Yes.
But I think that if you took Rabbi Heschel's name out and substituted it with Rav Kook, it would also fit.
Yes, I would agree with that as well. Now, just for sake of...
With no respect to Rabbi Heschel, I'm saying, like...
Yeah, no, for sure.
I'm saying...
I think Rav Kook was also a poetic soul, absolutely. I just, for the sake of completeness, want to read to you... So, Rabbi Held makes a point of saying that no one else noticed this about Heschel, to which I would say he's wrong. And I want to find the...
Have you told him this?
No, I have not.
You don't even need to tell him he's wrong. You can say, hey, somebody else made the same point that you're making in your book.
So...
Someone was endorsing
no, he actually specifically calls out this book as having missed the point. So in Edward Kaplan's Spiritual Radical, he also mentions Heschel's the way he writes, and he says as follows: Heschel excelled in fluid, musically repetitive style rather than in systematic linear exposition. He crafted his manuscripts so that tone was as important as content. And in the footnote, he gives you, in conversations with me, Samuel Dressler remembered Heschel showing him a manuscript of The Earth is the Lord's and asking him to comment on the meter of the writing. So he's intentionally writing it to be lyrical, musical. Even though some of it is prose, it still conveys a different emotion when it's written as song, as poetry. And that's, I think, what we were just saying, right? That the reason someone writes poetry, and actually I should mention this. So I asked Yoshua November, why does somebody write poetry instead of prose? And he said, I think the same thing that everyone here is saying after they've had like 5 seconds to think about it, which is that there's an added dimension to poetry, that the author doesn't just want to impart information, she or he wants you to feel something. So I think at the most basic level, that's what Shir Hashirim is about. Shlomo HaMelech set out to do more than write a song to God. He wanted to convey a feeling. We talked about the Rambam's perspective, or Cook's perspective, as essentially eros leads to agape, that the story is about human love, and from human love, you can then extrapolate to what love of God is about. But I think that's only half of the story. If we were to stop there, then we don't really understand why Rabbi Akiva was so head over heels in love with Shir Hashirim, right? There's millions of love songs. There are plenty of songs that are extolling God, what makes Shir Hashirim special. Okay, here is what I think, for what it's worth, and we can try to pull it apart. I believe that Shir Hashirim is a song about the concept of song. It's an ode to the artistry of human creation, or perhaps the collaboration that an artist forms with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I believe its purpose is not just to teach that eros leads to agape, but rather that there's an appreciation that I, as a human being, have been endowed with the creativity to produce. Embedded in that is the acknowledgement and the understanding that art, any art, and not just art, but the drive to create art, is in some way an expression of a partnership with God, and therefore it's holy. We could offer 100 different quotes that sort of illustrate this concept. You see it in all media, to the point where, like, Lord of the Rings, I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. I went and saw the movies, and they added this character just so that there would be a love interest, right? There was no female elves, and then in the movie there's this female elf just so that there can be, right? The quote I want to give you is from Mozart, and he says as follows: "Neither a lofty degree of intelligence, nor imagination, nor both together go into the making of genius. Love, love, love. That is the soul of genius." I think
Mozart said that?
Mozart said that.
He said it in German.
Yes, he did say it in
So
German.
It
Yeah,
must have sounded way worse.
it sounded more German.
Yeah.
More.
I think this approach might shed an interesting perspective on the second of the 10 Commandments. So the second commandment says as follows: "Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotzicha me'eretz Mitzrayim v'beis avadim, lo yeh lecha Elohim acharim al panai." You're not allowed to have any avodah zarah. That is pasuk Gimel. Pasuk Dalet says, "Lo ta'aseh lecha pesav v'chol tmuna asher b'shamayim mimal v'asher be'aretz mitachas v'asher b'mayim mitachas la'aretz." You can't make any sculpted images or any likeness of the stuff that's in the heavens or the stuff that's below in the water or on the land. And then lo tishtachaveh lehem v'lo ta'avdeim. Right? That's pasuk Hey. So the Sforno says that pasuk Dalet is telling you. So if I have pasuk Gimel and I have pasuk Hey, you can't worship idols. What do I need pasuk Dalet for? Pasuk Dalet is also don't make idols. So the Sforno says you can't make them even if you have no intention to worship them. Why can you not make them if you have no intention to worship them? Because
it's a frustration of the purpose of the idea of partnership with you and God.
You're taking the creative, the artistic drive, and you're channeling it into something that's not God.
Right.
Right? That's why you can't make them. Even if you're just going to make them and throw them out, you can't do it. Because you're using that partnership for something that is not for God. What I think this means for Pshat is that to focus on a particular scene, like the coronation of Shlomo, is less important than the overall message and the experience. Sure, you can ask, okay, well, why was this pasuk used? Why is that term used here or there? And maybe we can allegorize the coronation as the public recognition of an artistic endeavor. Or we can say, even on a more fundamental level, that we don't know. Or that it's there because Shlomo found it to be beautiful and it would contribute to the overall beauty and experience of Shir Hashirim. If we take this as a working assumption, I think it allows us to play out two more interesting things. One of the questions that we mentioned earlier is, why is there no mention of God? What I would propose is that perhaps the fact that there is no mention of God is the strongest way to call attention to him. If there had been a few fleeting mentions of God in various passages, we wouldn't have taken any note. But the complete absence of something so expected draws attention to the expectation. It's why we have to note that there's an absence of Moshe's name in Tetzaveh, right? There's no Moshe there, and we have to. So Moshe
there's
said
no God in Megillat Esther.
Right, there's no God in Megillat Esther. Also calls attention to it. If there's an omission in a narrative, it needs explanation. If there's an omission in poetry, it's a conscious choice, and it's demanding of your attention. Let's assume, that the absence of God is due.
Say that again. If there's no mission.
If there's an omission of God in narrative, it requires an explanation. If there's an omission of God in poetry, it's a conscious choice that demands your attention.
Okay.
It's one thing to notice it and then, I have to explain it. It's another thing in poetry to say it's intentionally not there to make me feel something about it not being there. I have to react to that. I don't have to intellectually understand it. I have to emotionally respond to it. So then, why would that be? Why would God's name not be there? What's the reaction? So what I want to suggest is that the lesson could be reflective of the overall narrative's message, which is, if God is not there, go seek Him out. Right? That's the whole point of Shir Hashirim. Is the man is not there, the woman goes looking for him. If you're intentionally not putting God in the piece, then what you're telling me is go look for him. He's in love with you, but you have to go search for him and find him. Another conspicuous missing piece, we get to it from the Benos Yerushalayim when they swear by the deers of the field. The woman makes the Benos Yerushalayim swear, and we ask why are they swearing by the deer of the field and not by the name of God? So maybe you can chalk it up in the narrative to the women's lack of familiarity with anything other than country life. But what about Shlomo, the author, right? Why even mention an oath if you can't put God's name into the book in the first place? I think that is done to underscore the fact that this is a universal message. There's no Yiddishkeit in the book, and there's no names to the couple, because this isn't a message that Shlomo just has for the Jewish people. This is a universal expression of love for the Jewish people and beyond the Jewish people. And that's what makes it so interesting that it's canonized in Tanakh, that God is in love with people, and He wants people to seek Him out, the Jewish people and beyond the Jewish people. And I think that's a beautiful message, and I think that's something that got Rabbi Akiva excited. I think that kind of that idea of creating a song out of love for God is why the book is in Tanakh as it is, even with the confusion that it may have precipitated. And I think that creating it was itself an act of love. I just want to end with a quote from Rilke, who's a German poet, and I'll end it with it in German. He says, Gesang ist Dasein, which essentially translates into song is existence, song is everything. And we should say chazak, chazak, b'nis chazek. Mazal Tov, everyone, on finishing Shir Hashirim.
Mazal Tov, amazing.